So we've been in a series that we have just simply called You Can Believe. We're getting very close to finishing up. We've been at it since Easter time. And the idea has been this: you can believe in God. There are all kinds of voices that are out there telling us that you shouldn't believe, that you're ignorant if you do, that you can't believe, or whatever it is. Whether it's through school systems or textbooks or Time magazine or the news or whatever. Maybe it's just people that were around or whatever it is. There are all these voices out there that are crying that to believe in God you must be stupid. But the truth is you can believe. You can be an intelligent, rational, thinking person and still believe in God. And that's what we've been talking about all this time throughout this series. And we have just a couple of sermons left, a couple of times to teach left today and next week. And we're going to try and finish this up. And then maybe we'll hit it again next year, because this seems to be one of those topics that people are just infinitely interested in to try and understand. And I think the reason for that is because of the kind of church that we have here, that God has created here. That means that we have all kinds of people that are here because they're curious. We have people that are here that are skeptics and they're not sure that they believe in God. And I think what has happened in this time that we've been together, as we've talked about science and philosophy and archaeology and evidences of God's existence, that there has been something that's beginning to shape and change and knock off some of those rough edges that sometimes keep us from belief. And we have people here that are in that place. And if you're a skeptic and you're curious and you're here for whatever reason, even if that means someone drugged you here. I had a serious drug problem, by the way, when I was first married to Jennifer. That means she drugged me to church constantly, and I didn't believe. I was a skeptic. I caught you on that one, didn't I? It just hit me. It was good. So I'll have to remember that. Someone write it down for me and remind me next week. I had a drug problem when I was... Anyway, so I didn't want to go, and Jennifer would drag me off to church, and I would sit there and say nasty things under my breath about all the stupid people on stage. God has a sense of humor. That's all I got to say, right? And I know you're doing that right now, so quit turning to the person next to you. I know what you're saying. I said it. So that when we have those people here, guess what? You're in a safe place. You're good. I'm glad you're here. Keep exploring, keep learning, keep challenging yourself. But we also have people that have believed all their lives, but they don't know why. They believe because they were taught it and they understand this is what it is, but they have no rational thinking process behind it maybe. And then we have people that are all over the place in the middle. We have people that have believed and they know exactly why they believe, and they can tell that story to other people and all those things. And that's awesome. No matter where you are, you're in the right place. Because my goal in this series of You Can Believe is multiple things. One of the goals is that no matter where you are in your faith walk, you will grow. That means if you have believed forever, that you will believe and grow in that belief, and that you will feel even more confident in your faith, so much so that you will want to tell other people about it. Last week was Mother's Day, although it seems like it was about 25 days ago to me, but it was a long week. Anybody? Long week? Yes. It was last Sunday, amazingly. Jennifer, my wife, who's back in the nursery today, she's a hospice nurse, and she was on call Sunday. So as soon as first service was out, she was off, and she was doing her thing. My kids decided they wanted to do their own thing, so they had nothing to do with me. So we finished up church, and I was lonely. So I went to my favorite restaurant in town and treated myself to a takeout meal of my favorite egg rolls. I know everybody, those of you that know me, know that's how it goes. I got to stop it. But anyway, I was there, and I'm waiting for my egg rolls, and I get to talking to the dude behind the counter. And so we're talking, and we ended up in a conversation about some of the weird things that people eat, and like eating spoiled cabbage and stuff like that. And we're having a discussion, and I said, I try not to eat spoiled things or Brussels sprouts. I did have that discussion with them. Those of you that know, you're good. But I try not to eat Brussels sprouts, especially spoiled cabbage. I've seen it under microscopes. It's not something I want to put in me. I just, I don't know why people would do such a thing, because he's always picking on me about getting the same meal. And so I said, as we were talking about it, I said, I've seen it all under microscopes. And I was a science guy, and I don't want to look at that kind of stuff. And as we're talking about that, he kind of asked the question. I said, well, I'm not a science guy really anymore. I'm more of a theology guy now. I'm a pastor, was a scientist, now a pastor. And he got this weird look on his face, and he goes, how does that work? And I said, well, it's a long story. And so we got to talking about it. And he goes, well, I'm a physics guy. And I said, that's great. I talked about physics today at church. In fact, I talked about the first and second laws of thermodynamics. The first law, that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one thing to another. And I kind of explained the implications of that and the Big Bang and creation and all that. And then briefly, I talked about the second law of thermodynamics, meaning that the law of entropy, things that are left to their own devices will go from a state of order to disorder, not the other way around. If we leave this building here for 100 years, what will happen? It will collapse. It will not turn into a skyscraper. And so I talked about that with him, and so he asked more questions. He said, well, what about natural selection, blah, 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 blah. We talked through it, talked about mutations and all that stuff. At the end of my 15-minute wait for my beautiful, glorious egg rolls, he has this look on his face. He goes, so where's your church again? He said, I think I need to come visit. I went, wow, it's beautiful. Good job. My hope is that through some of this craziness, and yes, big terms that I'm doing my best to define for you, because big terms don't mean anything if you don't understand it, but you got to hear it a little bit. As we've been talking about through some of this stuff, my hope is that those of you that believe it, even if you're just curious, you will take these things with you, even if it's just concepts, and then you will meet some dude behind a counter when you're waiting for your egg rolls, and you'll be able to speak some sort of hope and truth into their life to the point where they at least will say, I want to know more. That's my hope. And that's one of my greatest goals. And of course, the other goal is that if you're here and you're seeking yourself, that through this you'll go, I know there's a creator. That was my story, by the way, my senior year in my biology program. I was taking advanced genetics and stuff, and that's when I went, there is no way that was accidental. It had to have been created. It had to have been designed, and I need to figure it out. And so that's my hope for you, because the ramifications are enormous, by the way. If you live the rest of your life thinking you are nothing more than a byproduct of a warm bowl pond, you will make different decisions in your life than if you believe that a creator created you on purpose, for a purpose, to live out something. It makes all the difference in the world. And then I think my third goal to this whole series has been that your children will understand that the things that they learn about in books like this may not actually be true. And that there may be an agenda to create a culture of non-belief. And that's happening more and more. And so this morning as we get started then, I want to read to you. I want to read to you Genesis chapter 1. Now, I don't normally read this volume of text on a Sunday, but this series has lent itself to kind of a different teaching format. And so each Sunday has been a little bit different. And so today I want to continue being a little different. I hope you're okay with that. If not, you can sneak out here in about 20 minutes. But here we are. So Genesis chapter 1. Now I'm going to read from New American Standard for you. If you have an NIV, you can follow along. I think we're going to try and put this up for you so you can follow along on the screen. But I want to read all of Genesis 1 because it has implications. And it has implications, and it begins with the very first sentence. Now, if anyone in here was ever a debater or you like to argue, I love to argue. I don't know if you can get that or not. I just love, not to argue just to be mean, but I love to discuss and explore and push and all those things. And so if you are trying to argue a point with somebody, and someone makes a big, long opening statement, but you can deny the very first thing that they said, or you can take the very first point that they make and throw it out, you've won the argument. You agree? In other words, if the very opening statement, which usually is your most powerful statement, if that is trash, there's no reason to pay attention to anything else. And I think that that is the same with the Bible. And I think that that is a very purposeful idea of the devil. I think it's a purposeful idea of people who want to get rid of an idea of faith or God. And it is, what do you pick on? It's the very first thing. In the beginning, God created. If we can prove that that's not true, why read the rest? And so let's read it. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening, and there was morning, one day. Then God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. God made the expanse, separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so. God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening, and there was morning, a second day. Then God said, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, let the dry land appear, and it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit after their kind with seed in them, and it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with the seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a third day. Then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. Let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening, there was morning, a fourth day. Then God said, let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens. God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply in the earth. There was evening and there was morning, a fifth day. Then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth after their kind. And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let us make man in our own image, according to our likeness. And let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed, it shall be food for you. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that moves on the earth, which has life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. From light to livestock, the assessment is the same. The creation was good. It was good, it was beautiful, it was productive, it was useful, it was beneficial, all those things. It was good. And each of those components of God's creation were good individually, but then at the very end, when God looks at all of creation, all together, what was it? It wasn't just good, it was very good. And I've got to tell you, friends, I believe that God is powerful enough to actually do that. I believe that God is powerful enough to actually create just as he said. My God is big enough to do it. Now, many disagree with that, and many don't like that idea. Some will say there is no intelligence at all. That in fact, all that we see around us is an accident. There is no purpose, no design, no designer. That it all began with an explosion, like a hand grenade. We have all the matter of the entire universe in the shape and the form of this little hand grenade, although science cannot tell us in any way, shape, or form where all that matter would have come from, because we know from the laws of physics that energy is not created nor destroyed, nor is matter created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. So they can't tell us where all the matter would have come from. They can't tell us what gave the energy to allow it to explode, yet they believe it with absolute and complete faith, which I have to tell you is absurd. No explosion creates order. And so we have some that would say still, regardless of what you believe, regardless of the laws of science, we believe there is no God. And what's interesting, when you talk to many of them, it's not that they believe it because of science, they believe it because of faith. And I'll tell you about a couple of those in a minute. Others will say that God sparked it because there's no other way to get around it. There is no way in science to get around something sparking, something moving. And so some will say, well, God sparked it, and then it all evolved on accident. Or others will say someone or God sparked it, and then he directed the mutations and the evolution. Others will say that in the Bible it talks about the days of creation. Maybe those days were thousands of years, or millions of years, or billions of years. And others will say, no, I'm going to err on the side of caution and believe that God is big enough to create just like he said. That he could say, let there be light, and light exists. Let there be a tree, and the tree is a fully grown, mature, beautiful tree. And some will say that God can create it as well. And my God is big enough to create. My God is big enough to speak light into existence and to speak truth into existence. And we can disagree on all those things, but let me urge you and yearn for you to at least explore these things from evidence, but also the Bible, to see what it is that God asks us to believe, and when in doubt, choose to trust God over a scientist. Is that too much to ask? When in doubt, trust God. Even churches have struggled with this. My undergraduate program was in a Catholic school, and they would teach all the time, there is no reason to disbelieve in evolution. There's no problem with evolution and the Bible. They don't contradict. The Pope's Pontifical Academy of Sciences actually said there is no contradiction in the theories of evolution in the Bible. Guess what? They're just incorrect. They just are. And we'll talk about it. We've been talking about it. But they don't mesh together. The question is, was it an accident or did God create it? And so we have to first then understand that there are ramifications to it. And my hope and my prayer is that you will choose to believe through all of these things. My story began there, by the way, in my senior year in college as I was studying advanced genetics. And I wasn't a Christian, I wasn't a believer, but I was curious. But as I began to study advanced genetics, you know what my conclusion was? There has got to be a creator. There is too much of a thumbprint to think anything else. And if there's a creator, that means I was created with purpose and a plan, and I need to figure out what that is because it makes a difference. And that was the beginning of my story of faith. And so first then, let's define evolution. We need to make sure. We've been dancing around that topic as we've talked about evidences and things, but we need to make sure that we've got a clear picture. And so any of these science textbooks, by the way, I taught from these science textbooks, and I did get permission to take them, just so you know. I didn't say that in the first service. Someone's probably going, oh, you probably nabbed that one. Great testimony there, Pastor. Yeah, I got permission. It's all good. And so these textbooks, here's what most of them, Hardcore, Grace, and Jovanovich, here's what they'll say about evolution. Evolution is just change over time. Now, you can go with that definition, but I don't know about you, but I've done some changing over the last 20 years. Anybody in here done any changing in the last 20 years? Some of the obvious ones are my waistline. That's changed in the last 20 years. It's because I found egg rolls. That was part of it. The other problem has been my hair has gotten confused and is growing backwards. And so it stopped growing here and it's coming out my ears. And in fact, Jennifer was kind enough to remind me of that this morning and asked if I wanted help to trim my ear hair. That's just not a nice thing, but here we are being transparent. We know it happens, right? So I've done some changing in the last 20 years, but that's not evolution. In fact, that would probably be considered the opposite, right? We've all changed. To say that evolution is change and living things over time is absolutely ludicrous for a definition. The real definition of evolution is that it is a theory. By the way, it can never be proven. There can never be a law of evolution because the scientific method says you have to see it and be able to experiment on it to prove it. And yet we have textbooks that say things like this. Mammals evolved more than 180 million years ago from a now extinct order of reptiles called theracids. Does that sound like a theory to you? It does not. It is fact. How about this one's even worse? We know that we evolved from ape-like ancestors over 2 million years ago. Does that sound like a theory? No. They're making a truth claim, an absolute truth claim, based on some of the most flimsy and ridiculous evidence you will ever see. And if we had hours, I could lay it out for you, but we'll just touch the surface of it. But here's what evolution really is. It is a theory of gradual change over eons of time through mutations that end up having a positive impact. It improves itself through gradual mutational change. And guess what? It doesn't happen. So, there are two forms of evolution. You got to know just real quick, because some, if they hear this on the internet later or whatever, they'll want to pick on me about it. So let me explain. There are two forms, macroevolution and micro. Macroevolution is this. That is the change from we get to a warm pond to little organisms to a fish, eventually an amphibian, a reptile, a bird, and a mammal. That's called macroevolution, change from one species to the next. Guess what? There is absolutely zero evidence for that in science. No matter what discipline of science you study, and I would debate anybody on that topic, there is none. No evidence whatsoever for macroevolution. There is microevolution, although it shouldn't be called microevolution. All microevolution is change within a species. So Darwin, when he went out and did all his research on the Galapagos Islands on finches, Darwin's finches, and he saw different finches, some with a curved beak, some with straight, some in between, he said that was one of the greatest examples of evolution. That's not. It's the same as dog breeds. Anybody in here have a mutt? Come on, I know you do. All of us have some mutts around, right? And we know that those mutts are created from two different types of dogs. Is that evolution? No. It's changed within the species. It does not change it into a cat. Even though some of you cat people would like for it to. It doesn't happen. You can't do it. In fact, we've taken fruit flies and we have exposed fruit flies, which have a very simple genetic package. We've taken fruit flies and we have exposed them to every chemical, every radiological thing, every mutational type chemical that we could think of to try and turn a fruit fly into a something else. And we have done it billions of times. And guess what? Not a single fruit fly has ever turned into a gnat. They continue to be able to have more little baby fruit flies, and there is no change. Macroevolution, change from one species to another, does not happen. It doesn't. And if that's true, then all these theories go out the door. Here's the thing, though. We are rarely informed in public. And this isn't just some pastor talking, okay? But you've got to look at the evidence out there. We are rarely informed of the deep-seated uncertainty that scientists even have about their own theories. We don't hear about it in magazines. We certainly don't hear about it in textbooks. We don't hear about it on the news. But there is absolute and complete deep-seated uncertainty about their own ideas of human origins and life by the scientific experts. Here's just a few. F. Clark Howell, who was an evolutionary biologist, here's what he said. There is no encompassing theory of evolution. There really never has been. Or how about Charles Darwin himself in The Origin of Species? He wrote this. Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum, you know, if you drive down the side of the highway, you can look at the rocks that have been blasted out, and you see the strata layers, different layers. Those supposedly are created over eons of time, and in those we should see the oldest fossils at the bottom and the newest fossils at the top. Guess what's funny about geology? Often, almost always, it's the opposite. The newest stuff is at the bottom and the oldest stuff's at the top. Isn't that weird? In fact, there's a piece of limestone that's like 150 miles long and 50 miles wide or something like that they found, and it's not broken. And all of the oldest stuff is at the top, and all the newest stuff is at the bottom. And their best answer is this 150-foot piece of limestone shifted out and upside down and never crashed. That is ridiculous. Okay? So anyway, how about this? So Charles says, geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which can be argued against this theory. Stephen Jay Gould, I love Stephen Jay Gould, atheist, evolutionary biologist, but he says some off-the-wall things that other evolutionary biologists hate, and here's what he says. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and the nodes of the branches. The rest is inference. In other words, we only see little pieces of the puzzle, like microevolution, but all that stuff that we talk about in all these textbooks, it's not there. We've inferred it by looking at what we want it to be. How about L. Harrison Matthews in the intro to Intro to Origin of Species? He says, the fact of evolution, in quotes, is the backbone of biology, and biology is thus in the peculiar position of being a science founded on an unproved theory. Is it then a science or a faith? It's a faith. And then the last one is Dr. George Wald, one of my favorites, 1967 Nobel Peace Prize winner. And he said, when it comes to origins of life, there are only two possibilities. That of spontaneous generation, which is the warm bond, organic molecules forming on their own, evolution. Spontaneous generation, or that of supernatural creation. There is no third way. He said, we disproved spontaneous generation over 100 years ago. For sure we did. Louis Pasteur and Spallanzani and others absolutely unequivocally denied that there's any possibility that life could come from non-life. All of the scientific community would believe in that law of biogenesis, by the way. So he said, we disproved it over 100 years ago, but that leads us only to one other conclusion, that of supernatural creation. Here's the catch. Listen, we choose not to accept that on philosophical grounds. Therefore, we choose to believe the impossible, that life arose spontaneously by chance. Now, you don't hear that stuff in the textbooks, do you? You don't see that on Time magazine, but these are the dudes that actually write the textbooks, and they don't even believe in their own theories. And so what we see as we look through science, as we look through every discipline of science, what we see constantly is evidence of a designer. We see a thumbprint everywhere, like in that law of biogenesis, which means life comes from life. There is no spontaneous generation. There is no warm pond that creates life. It's impossible. We talked about it last week with the Urey-Miller experiment, in which is nothing more than a biochemist's magic trick to try and create some amino acids that said, oh, look, There we've produced the building blocks of life. It's ridiculous. Or thermodynamics in a Big Bang type scenario. We've talked about all of those things. Or the human eye. Here's what Darwin said. I quoted it for you a few weeks ago, but here's the quote, and I want to read it to you, that Darwin himself said with the human eye. He said, to suppose that the eye, with all of its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus at different distances, for emitting different amounts of light, for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. Darwin himself looked at the complexities of the human eye and said, it is absurd to believe that that could have evolved on accident through mutational development. Absurd to believe it. Why? It's because God created it. That's why it's absurd to believe that it was on accident. The complexity is overwhelming. And so when we sit down and we read something like Genesis 1, and then continue on with chapter 2 that just gives more detail, we see that God is creative. Or how about this? Now, let's do a little experiment, class participation, okay? And so let's say that you and I are out in the jungle someday, and we are walking along in the jungle, and we stumble across this. You tell me, what assumptions would you make? Go ahead, you can talk, it's fair.
Fell out of the sky.
Louder.
Fell out of the sky.
Fell out of the sky? In other words, you would not assume it was intended to be there. Okay, what else?
Somebody dropped it.
Someone dropped it? Good. What other assumptions would you make? Someone put it there for a purpose? Because it looks like it might have purpose. Would anyone agree in here that this might have purpose of some kind? Even though if we don't know what it is, would we look at that complexity and go, that was intended to do something? Would you agree? Would anyone in here make the assumption that it grew there by accident? That it grew there in the middle of the jungle, all by itself? Even if we gave it 1 billion years, would anyone assume that that creek was able to create itself through minerals in the dirt? Anybody? Anyone? No. See, no intelligent human being. See, those guys love to cast stones at people of faith. No intelligent human being would look at something like this out in the middle of nature and conclude anything other than it was created by a designer. That there was purpose and plan, and that it took time and intricacy to create all these components that had some purpose, even though we may not be able to understand it. Any human being with a brain would make that assumption. Would you agree? And yet, we look at something like this, and you compare it against the DNA of even a fern plant, which is bigger in a sense than human DNA, or you look at the human DNA, the human genome, and that is 1,000,000 times more complex than this. And our assumption is that was an accident. Warm ponds created it. I've got to tell you, in Darwin's own words, that is absurd to the highest degree. No one would assume this was accident. No one would assume this grew out of the dirt. Just like no one should assume that humans or any of the other created order would be created on accident. Or how about this one? Something that's called irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity means there are systems that are so complex you cannot reduce them anymore and have them still function. A mousetrap is a good example. If you can envision a mousetrap, I should have brought one, but if you can envision a mousetrap, is there any component of that mousetrap that you can take away and still have it function as a mousetrap? The answer is no. If you take the platform out, it doesn't work. If you take the spring out, it doesn't work. If you take the lever out, it doesn't work. If you take the hook out, it doesn't work. If you take out the pedal, it doesn't work. There's no component of a mousetrap that you can take away and still have it be a mousetrap. In other words, it's irreducibly complex. And we can believe that and understand that about a mousetrap. But guess what? It's the same thing with our cellular system. Our cells, we cannot reduce it down and make it still function. You can pop out little organelles all you want out of your cells, and guess what? The cells don't work. And here's another example. If you think, well, that's too complex, let me think a little simpler. How about a bacteria? We're going to put up an image for you of a bacterial flagellum. Now, a flagellum is just like a little whip-like structure that's on the end of a bacteria. And some bacteria have one of these, and so maybe it'll show, maybe not. I'll talk you through it. But what we found as we studied bacteria, most people would agree that bacteria is a pretty simple life form. Would you agree? And so we look at that bacteria, and we found over the years, as we studied them, that some of these bacteria have a whip that will go one direction if it's heading toward food, and it will actually spin the opposite direction if it's trying to get away from something. That seems like it's not just a little floating device, that it has purpose and design. But what you see when you look deeper with a scanning electron microscope of a bacteria is you see the most amazing complexity built into this bacteria. You see rotors and spinning pistons and all these things that look like an electrical power plant when you look at it. And what's funny about it is you cannot take out one single component of that and have it still function as a bacteria. It is irreducibly complex, which means this very simply, that it could not have evolved each of those little itty-bitty pieces over eons of time. That it had to all come into the presence at the exact same moment in order for it to function. It is irreducibly complex, which means that it was created. And other complex systems we can talk about all day long. Like, for instance, circulatory system and respiratory system. Those things cannot be independent of one another. The heart needs the lungs in order to function, and the lungs and the circulatory system are dependent in the sense that the lungs can't function without the heart. They go hand in hand. So the question is, which one evolved first? It's impossible. They had to come into existence at the same moment in time, which means what? They were created. They were not accidents. They were created. And on we could go. But the so what to this, I think, is this. The so what, as we look at these ideas in this text of creation in Genesis chapter 1, is that from science, but also from the Bible. That means from biology and theologically, but also from history and archaeology and medicine and philosophy, all the stuff we've been talking about for the last few weeks, it is clear from the evidence that the best answer for why you are sitting here right now is an intelligent creator that had purpose and plan for you. That there is no way that you are an accident. That when you look out at nature around you, there is no accident. It was created by a creator. And you don't have to take my word for it. I mean, there's all kinds of scientists that say it too. Like, there's a nuclear physicist with the Atomic Energy Commission years ago. His name's Theodore Tahamason. And here's what he said. Scientists who go about teaching that evolution is a fact of life are great con men. It's a pretty dramatic statement, don't you think? And that's what we see. These textbooks, we can open up page after page after page of absolute and complete frauds of science. In other words, all those things that you may have learned about years ago, like Piltdown Man and Nebraska Man and Java Man and Horse Man. Have you ever heard of those? Those missing links between the monkeys and humans? Guess what? We found these amazing things. Like, one of them was actually a skull cap that someone found an orangutan jawbone, and they filed it down just enough where the orangutan jawbone would fit into the skull cap, and they went, look, there's the missing link. And they went on with that for decades, and it's still in textbooks, even though it's very obvious fake when we look at it through genetic evidence. Or how about Nebraska Man? That was one of my favorites. They found one tooth. And from that one tooth, they created an entire subspecies of human-ape combo. In other words, they created an entire skull and an entire skeleton based on a tooth. And you know what was even more funny about that? The tooth ended up being a pig tooth. It wasn't even remotely human. Or another one, they found a little piece of skull cap that was about that big, and out of this one piece of skull cap that would have been somewhere in this area, they created an entire skeletal structure, an entire face structure of a missing link from a piece of skull cap that big, and then only later to find out, guess what, that piece of skull cap was from a donkey. And these are the beautiful images that adorn our textbooks that teach us that we are accidents of nature. Or how about one of my favorites, and I'll just give you one more. A scientist by the name of Haeckel, 1874, an embryologist. And he came up with this really fancy word. You want to hear it? Here it is, the recapitulation theory, which is defined as ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. What that means is this, that an advanced life form like us, in utero, as embryos, we go through each evolutionary stage of development of all of our predecessors. And what he did is he took a chicken and a frog and a bird and a salamander and a human, and he laid out all the embryology steps and said, look, they all look the same at the same stage. They all look the same, they all look the same, they all look the same. That proves that we are all evolved from one common thing, all organisms. Guess what? It was a fraud. Even his contemporaries in 1874 knew it was a fraud. And they picked on him about it even then. But guess what? Some textbooks, it's still in there. And in 2000, Stephen Jay Gould, you know that guy I was telling you about, atheist evolutionary biologist, he wrote a paper about Haeckel's drawings and said, why does the scientific community keep using these frauds? They are frauds. Everyone knows it. Everyone in the scientific community knows it. They've been a fraud for over 100 years. We know it is a fraud, yet it is a purposeful, overt plan to make you believe that you are an accident, to make your children believe they are an accident. It's just a fake. If I had another hour, we could talk more. You'd be asleep, but I would be having a great time. Let me just say one more. The geologic column. In the textbook, I wish I had the page. The geologic column, that stuff, all the oldest stuff is there, and all the newest stuff is up at the top. Guess what? All the not carbon dating, but uranium lead methods, and potassium argon, the stuff they use to date out things millions of years old, guess what? They calibrated that based on the geologic column, which is imaginary. So the way that they tell us that things are millions and millions of years old are calibrated on an idea, not on actual science at all. It's fake. It's not millions of years, there's no question. If we had time, I could lay out for you why it's not millions of years. And if it's not millions of years, evolutionary theory falls on its face. God created. God created. And so where do we go from here? The now what to this, I think, is extraordinarily simple. The now what to this is believe. The now what to this is believe in God. He has continually revealed himself over and over and over again. And the call to you is believe. Even if you believed all of your life, make a new choice to believe again. If you don't believe and you're curious or you're scared or you're seeking or you're curious, believe. The evidence is there. When we look through Genesis 1, we see a story of a God who was so crazy in love with you already that he created a way to share his goodness and his love and his beauty with you. He created you for purpose. And part of that's to follow. So the now what to this is believe. And if God is big enough to create, if God is big enough to say, let there be light, and there's light. If God is big enough to say, let there be waters and land, and let there be beasts, and let there be mankind. If God is powerful enough to speak those things into existence, and my God is, I hope your God is, my God is powerful enough to do all those things. If he is, then when we open the pages of Scripture in places like Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 through 30, here's what it says, and we can believe it. It says, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. We can read a passage like that and believe it's true because God is creator and he is trustworthy. It's not an allegory. It's not a story. God is the most powerful thing that we can even imagine, and we still can't even imagine. In our greatest imaginations of the powerfulness of God. And so when he says, come to me, all you who are tired and worn out and heavy-hearted and burdened and broken, come to me. We can believe that he can do something about it because he's that very same God that can say, with that same mouth that spoke that, let there be light. I think that's amazing. So that's the now what. My prayer is that you will choose to follow. Whether you make an outward decision today or whether you make a decision this week or somewhere before you leave this earth, that you will choose to believe because the Bible makes it clear and the evidence makes it clear that God is exactly what he said he was and is. And so that's my prayer this morning. Well, I'm going to finish by going to the back, and I'm going to be praying for you. And if you want to come pray with me, come pray, come talk, come figure out what you need to do next. If you want to believe, John will do part of the song, and then we'll come up and we'll finish out today with a couple last things. But again, my prayer is that God will change your heart. Let me pray for that now, and then come back and talk to me if you want to. God, I continue to be amazed after all of these years of your creative ability and power. God, I praise you for being able to read Genesis 1 and see that you really are the creator that you tell us about. That you're not a liar like some will say, or that Moses or someone else didn't just make up some grand story or beautiful poem, but that you really are creator. So God, help us to believe it. Help us to internalize it and let that idea of you as creator change us. Because when we understand that you created us, it means that you created us with purpose, for a purpose. So God, part of that purpose we know is to follow and to love you and to seek you, because you promise to reveal yourself if we do. And so God, we pray today that hearts in here will be changed because of what they've seen, even through science, because you created science. Science is not above you. So God, in this time, we ask, God, that you will change our hearts, that we will begin to follow. You will change our minds in the way that we think, and it will affect the way we see the world and hear the world around us. And that we can leave this place with hope in our hearts and a message on our lips to be able to speak hope into other people's lives who are broken as well. So God, move in us right now to go to another level in our faith and our belief in you. It's in Jesus that I pray.